It's chapter 22. We are at the last chapter of Patricia Reed's Talking to Dragons. Welcome to Miss Tucker Reads, and let's get started. Chapter 22, which contains an engagement, a feast, and a happy ending. See, I told you there were spoilers in the title, so I wouldn't tell you. That's it. Okay. We appeared in one of the rooms inside the castle, a small, cozy-looking place with lots of bookshelves. Sounds like my kind of room. It was just as dusty as all the other rooms Shira and I had been through, but when Father waved, all the dust vanished. Mother muttered something about instant cleaning being no excuse for letting things get into such a state, and we all sat down. The king looked at us. "I believe this should begin with you, Cimmerian," he said. Mother looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded and began. Apparently, Mother really was a princess. She was the youngest daughter of the ruler of a very large kingdom on the other side of the mountains of morning. And she'd thought it was boring. So she ran away and became Kazal's princess. Kazal wasn't king of the dragons then. She and Mother got along very well, and after a while Kazal started teaching her dragon magic. And then the wizards helped someone poison the old king of the dragons, and all the dragons went to the Fort of Whispering Snakes to try to move Colin's stone, and Kazal was the one who did. Practically the first thing Kazal did after she became king was to kick the wizards out of the Mountains of Morning, which made the wizards plenty mad. So they decided to start a war by getting the dragons to attack the enchanted forest. That was how Mother met my father. He came to see Kazal about some burned parts of the forest, and he found Mother instead. Then the two of them went searching for Kazal, who'd been kidnapped by the wizards, and by the time they got her free, they had decided to get married. Kazal was Mother's matron of honor. The wizards didn't make any more trouble for almost a year, but when they finally did, they made up for the wait. They stole Father's sword right out of the castle armory. Oh, by the way, if you hear any little noises, I just got a parakeet, and he's kind of chirping over there. So I don't know if you can hear him or not, but he's going every once in a while. It's so cute. They'd figured out that the sword was the main thing keeping them from absorbing magic in the enchanted forest, Father said. And they thought that if they got rid of it, they could soak up the whole forest and use all the extra magic to wipe out the dragons. They didn't realize at first that even without the sword, I could use the magic of the forest against them. "Well, then what good was this stupid sword anyway?" Shira asked. "If you didn't need it to stop the wizards." "I did need it," Father said. "I can deal with 1 or 2 wizards at a time, but not the whole society of wizards at once, and I can't be everywhere. The sword is connected directly to the magic of the enchanted forest, so it protects the whole forest and not just the area where it happens to be. If you want the technical details, ask Telemaine. He helped me set it up." With the sword gone, Father had to stay in the enchanted forest to keep the wizards out. Kazal and Morwen and Telemaine all volunteered to go steal the sword back, but there was a problem. When the sword is outside the enchanted forest, only the king of the enchanted forest or a member of his family can stand to hold it for more than a few seconds, and Mother was the only other member of Father's family then. Father wasn't too pleased about this because Mother was going to have a baby, me, but they didn't really have any other choice. So Mother and the rest left to find the sword, and Father stayed in the enchanted forest to fight off the wizards. They didn't expect the whole society of wizards to attack the castle the day after they left, but that's what happened. Fortunately, Mother had a feeling something was wrong, and she sent Kazal back to check. When Kazal saw all the wizards attacking the castle, she flew back to the Mountains of Morning and ordered all the dragons to come help. Meanwhile, Mother and the others found the sword with Antarel guarding it. He was the son of Zeminar, the head wizard of the Society of Wizards, and Mother didn't like him much. So when he tried to keep them from taking the sword back, Mother melted him. Unfortunately, by the time they got back to the castle, the battle was over and the wizards had put their shield up. Kazal had sent some dragons out to look for wizards who'd gotten away, and then she and Mother and Morwen and Telemaine had a long talk about what to do next. All of them were sure that the wizards had put a spell on the king, and they were just as sure that the sword would break the spell. Unfortunately, the sword could only be used by one of the kings of the enchanted forest or his children, and then only when the earth, air, and water of the enchanted forest and the fire of the sword itself had recognized the person holding it as a rightful heir. And the only way to be recognized was to go out in the enchanted forest and hope you'd do the right things at the right times. So the dragons put up their own shield around the castle to keep the wizards from sneaking inside, and after a while Mother had me. About that time Antrel found her. He blamed her for his father's death because she'd taken the sword, and he tried to kill her. Mother had to melt him again. Goodness. After that, Mother decided that she'd better find somewhere to hide until I was old enough to use the sword. As long as it stayed inside the enchanted forest, the sword was invisible to wizards' magic. Mother, however, wasn't. If she stayed in the enchanted forest, one of the wizard's spells would find her. On the other hand, she couldn't take the sword out of the forest and still keep it hidden any more than the wizards could. So Mother hid the sword inside the forest, then left and never went back until the day she gave the sword to me. She put up some good spells to keep Antrel from finding us, and then waited. She taught me all the right spells and manners and history and things, without ever telling me anything about the sword, or the king of the enchanted forest, or the war with the wizards. That way, I would have a chance of being recognized by the sword and reaching the castle without getting caught by one of the wizard's spells. I'm afraid it was rather hard on you, Daystar, she said, but we couldn't think of anything else that had a chance of working. Well, I think we were lucky, Shira said. The king smiled at me. Kings of the enchanted forest are supposed to be lucky. Shira blinked. You weren't very lucky, were you? What did those wizards do to you anyway? The king shook his head. Zeminar and about 10 others broke into the castle during the battle. I got a couple of them, but without the sword I was outnumbered a little too badly. They wanted to kill me, but they couldn't do it inside the castle without the sword, and they couldn't take me outside the castle because of the dragons. So Zeminar decided to put me in storage, in a manner of speaking, while he went back for the sword. The simulacrum was a decoy in case someone managed to get into the castle while he was gone. But where were you for 17 years? Shira said. There are places that can be reached through the proper doors, places that can't be gotten into or out of except through such a door. Some of them are very large, some aren't. Zeminar found one that suited him and put me in it and then hid the door. Without the sword or the key, I couldn't get out until someone put the door back up. His smile was a little crooked. I'm lucky that one doesn't need to eat in those places, or I wouldn't have lasted 17 years. But I still don't understand about Antrel. He acted as if he wanted to do something to Daystar a lot more than he wanted the sword. Antrel never knew what the sword was, Mother said. Zeminar, the head wizard, was the only one who knew the whole story, and after the way Antrel failed to guard the sword, the new head wizard wouldn't tell him anything. Ha! Said Shira. Served him right. But what did Daystar do to Antrel anyway, and how? He never did anything like that before. He couldn't do it before, Father said. The kings of the enchanted forest can use the magic of the forest directly, but only after the sword has acknowledged them. Daystar wasn't acknowledged until he put the sword into the fire. Oh. Shira sat back, looking thoughtful. There was a moment's silence, then I thought of something else I wanted to ask about. Mother, do you know anything about fire witches' magic? Yes, of course, she said. Why do you want to know? Could you teach Shira how to do things? I said. That's why she came to the enchanted forest in the first place. She helped me a lot, and I think she ought to have some sort of reward. I didn't do very much, Shira objected. You kept me from staying a statue, and I think you saved my life when the roof of the Caves of Chance fell in. You're the one who deserves a reward. I think, Mother broke in before I could answer Shira, that it is time you told us what you have been doing these past few days. I have a general idea, but I would like a few more details, and Mendenbar hasn't heard anything about it yet. I looked at Father, and he nodded, so Shira and I went through our story again. I did most of the talking, with Shira putting in a comment now and then when she thought I was leaving something out. I finished by explaining about Shira's magic. Both Mother and the king looked rather startled, and then the king began to smile. A polite fire witch, he said thoughtfully. Very unusual. I don't want to have to be polite to people, Shira said angrily. Why not? I asked. You're getting much better at it. Especially not to you, Shira said. I can understand that, Father said. It's his fault after all. What? Shira and I said together. It's Daystar's fault that you have to be polite, Father repeated. His and the sword's. One of the things the sword does, besides control wizards, is unlock people's talents, particularly magical talents. When you met Daystar, both of you touched the sword at the same time. You wanted to use your magic, and Daystar wanted you to be more polite. I think the sword did the best it could under the circumstances. I knew it, Shira glared at me. I said it was that stupid sword's fault. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know. But at least you can use your magic now sometimes. Isn't that better than not being able to use it at all? No, said Shira. It's worse. I have to go home and be nice to people, and it probably won't work most of the time because I have to mean it, and how can I mean it if I'm always thinking about being able to do magic, and it's boring at home, and people will still keep expecting me to do things I can't do. I don't even know anyone who would teach me about magic, even if I could get it to work all the time. I'll never learn anything. Little flickers of flame started running down Shira's cheeks. It took me a minute to realize she was crying fire, and when I did, I didn't know what to do about it. That is quite enough of that, Mother said while I was still thinking. Shira looked up. You don't know what it's like. It's horrible. On the contrary, I know quite well what it's like, Mother said, and the solution is obvious. In fact, it's the same one I used. What? Shira blinked, and the flame tears stopped running down her face. What do you mean? You can become Kazul's princess, Mother said. She doesn't have one at the moment. It would be a great, or there would, I can't read. It would have a great many advantages on both sides. You will learn considerably more about magic, dragons, and the enchanted forest than you would anywhere else, and Kazul will get a princess who can't accidentally be roasted if one of the other dragons gets out of hand. And you'll be living nearby, which will give Daystar and Mendenbar a chance to figure out how to reverse that ridiculous politeness spell. But I'm not a princess, Shira said. If Kazul says you are a princess, then you are a princess, Mother said firmly. No one is going to argue with the King of the Dragons. Besides, it will be an excellent experience for you later. I opened my mouth to ask what Mother meant by that, but Shira asked, she didn't say an excellent experience. She said, besides, it will be excellent experience for you later, meaning she could use what she learns. I opened my mouth to ask what Mother meant by that, but Shira asked, but are you sure Kazul would be willing to do it? Kazul will have no objection whatsoever to training the next Queen of the Enchanted Forest, Mother said calmly. You don't need to worry about that. I closed my mouth very quickly and looked at the floor, feeling my face getting hot. I heard Shira say, "Oh," in a small voice, and then the king laughed. Simmarine, you're moving a little too fast, he said, still chuckling. If Shira wants to go live with Kazul, I'm sure we can make the arrangements, but there's no reason to hurry. She can stay here until she decides. There's plenty of room. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back outside. Kazul was going to talk to Willin about a feast, and I haven't had a good meal in ages. As a matter of fact, I haven't had any meals in 17 years. Mother didn't object, so the king moved us all to the feast with another wave. Everyone was there, dwarves and dragons and elves and cats, and even a few wizards who'd been on the king's side. Oh, I didn't know there were any. Morwen was there too, but she spent quite a bit of time popping back to the castle to make sure Teleming wasn't doing anything she disapproved of. Mother and the king sat at one end of a long table, and Kazul sat on the other. The elf Willin scurried up and down, making sure everyone had enough to eat, and plainly having a wonderful time. Shira and I sat at the middle of the table, and the people sitting next to us kept changing. All of them wanted to hear about how Mother had stolen the sword back, and how Shira and I had gotten into the castle and broken the spell. I'm getting tired of this, Shira whispered to me while some of the people next to us were changing. Let's go someplace else for a while and let them tell each other about the stupid wizards. I'm tired of it too, but I don't think we should leave, I said. You don't? No, of course you don't. How very irksome, said a squeaky voice from the ground by my left foot. Suz, I said, looking down. Where did you come from? The forest, of course. The lizard ran up the leg of the table in a thin gold streak, then stopped and looked around nervously. Is that kitten anywhere close by? No, she's inside, said Shira. I don't think she likes the crowd. Why? The lizard looked at her. If you'd ever been jumped on by something 4 times as big as you are and been rolled around until you were dizzy, not to mention bruised, you wouldn't have to ask." He balanced on his tail and peered over the edge of a bowl of nuts. "Would you like something to eat?" I said. "I believe I would," Suz said. He made a very fast bouncing motion, and a moment later he was holding one of the nuts. "What are you going to do now that the wizards are gone?" "They aren't all gone," I said. "I think a few of them were on our side, and some of the others actually got away." "They did?" Suz considered for a moment. "I suppose they did. How very annoying. But what are you going to do?" He looked from me to Shira and back. "I'm going to be Kazal's princess," Shira said before I could answer. Suz fell over backward, just missing a silver bowl full of cranberry jelly. "Oh, my gracious goodness oh," he squeaked. "However did that happen?" "Mother suggested it," I said. I looked at Shira. "But I thought you hadn't made up your mind yet." "I just decided," Shira said. "Home is boring, and this way I can learn things and maybe even stop having to be polite to get my magic to work." I suspected Shira was more interested in not having to be polite than she was in learning things, but I didn't say so. "I'm glad you're going to stay," I said instead. "You are?" Suz said skeptically. He peered up at me. "Why, you really are! How amazing!" I didn't know what to say to that, but fortunately I didn't have time to think about it. Father and Mother and Kazal all stood up just then, and everyone else got very quiet. Father looked around for a moment, smiled, and started speaking. First, he thanked everyone for coming to help with the wizards, and then he introduced Mother formally as "my wife Simmerine." All the dragons and elves and other people shouted and applauded. The din was tremendous. Din means like really loud noise. Like when the cafeteria gets really loud, that would be a din. The din was tremendous. Then he introduced me, and I had to stand up and be clapped at. After that, Kazal said that the dragons were pleased to be of assistance, and everyone sat down and started talking again. The whole thing didn't take very much time, which surprised me. I'd thought speeches at feasts were supposed to be longer. Even with short speeches, the feast lasted longer than I expected. Shira left after a while to go find Night Witch and talk to the little dragon. I stayed at the table. I didn't have much choice. Every time I tried to get up, someone new would pounce on me and start asking questions. I got very tired of it, but I couldn't seem to get away. I was glad when it was finally over. The next few days were a little hectic, but then the elves and dragons who'd been in the battle went home and things started to settle down. Morwen and Telemaine were almost the last to leave because of Telemaine's shoulder. Morwen had to stay to take care of it, and she wouldn't let Telemaine go anywhere until he was well. "It's simply ridiculous," Telemaine grumbled at breakfast on the third morning after the battle. "I am quite capable of traveling with my arm in a sling." "Yes, and the first time you ran across a slowstone or a pool of transformation water, you'd take your arm out of the sling and start tinkering with it," Morwen said, "which would not be good for that shoulder." Telemaine glared at her. "I disagree." "Disagree all you like, but you're not leaving the castle for another 2 days," Morwen said. She picked up a basket of muffins, took one, and passed the rest to Mother. 2 days? Mother raised an eyebrow. "Is our hospitality unwelcome?" "No, of course not, but Simmerine, I have a tremendous amount to do if I'm to be ready for the wedding in time." I hadn't heard anything about any wedding being planned, but I was carefully not looking at Shira anyway. Then Father looked up. "Wedding?" he said. Morwen smiled. "Telemaine and I are getting married." Shira and Father and I all said, "What?" at the same time, but we were nearly drowned out by a chorus of startled meows from Morwen's cats. "Yes, married," Morwen said to one of them, "and it has nothing to do with you, so you may as well be quiet and accept it." The cats made unhappy noises for another minute until Morwen frowned at them. Then they all got up and went over to a corner of the room where they sat muttering to each other with their tails twitching. Morwen waited for a moment before she nodded and turned back to the table. "They'll get used to the idea." Congratulations to both of you," I said. Father was looking at Mother. "Simmerine, did you know about this?" "Not exactly," Mother said and smiled. "I see." Father shook his head. "Well, congratulations." "Thank you," Telemaine said. He started to reach for a plate of sausages with his bad arm, and Morwen stopped him. 2 days later, Morwen announced that Telemaine's arm was well enough for him to travel. She promised to invite all of us to the wedding, even the dragons, and then she and Telemaine left the castle, followed by a string of disapproving cats. Shira and Kazal were the last to leave. I was a little taken aback when I heard. I knew that Kazal lived in the Mountains of Mourning, but it hadn't occurred to me that if Shira was going to be Kazal's princess, she would have to live there too. I didn't say anything about it, though. I felt too silly for not having realized it before. Father and Mother and I went to see them off. Mother gave Shira some advice about princessing, and Father told her that if she was going to glare at dragons, she'd have to learn to glare politely. Then they both went to talk to Kazal. Shira looked at me. "I'm beginning to wonder whether I really want to do this or not," she said. "Does he really expect me to practice glaring at people?" "No, just at dragons," I said. "If he wanted you to glare at everyone, he would have said so." "Well, I think it— Night Witch!" Shira bent to retrieve the kitten, who had been investigating one of Shira's bundles a little too vigorously. "Where did you get all of this, anyway?" I asked as she straightened up. There were 3 bundles in the heap Night Witch had been climbing, and I knew Shira hadn't had any of them when we'd arrived at the castle. "Morwen gave me that one, and Cimmerian gave me the others," she said. "She said I would need them if I was going to live with Kazal. I don't even know what's in all of them yet." I couldn't think of anything else to say, because just then I realized how much I was going to miss having Shira around. The Mountains of Mourning weren't exactly close to the castle, and I didn't think Kazal would be interested in flying back and forth every day. Shira frowned. "What's the matter with you?" "I was just wishing you were going to be living a little closer to the castle," I said. "I don't see why. I'm going to have to come here a lot anyway, at least until you get that stupid politeness spell off me so I can use my fire magic. So what difference does it make? I'm the one who has to do all the traveling back and forth." Shira looked towards Kazal. "I think they're ready to go. Come on, Daystar." She picked up one of the bundles and started walking. I didn't say anything, but I felt a lot happier than I had a few minutes earlier. Getting rid of that spell didn't sound easy, and until it was gone, Shira would have to spend quite a bit of time at the castle. I was sure that if I had enough time, I could think of some reason for her to keep visiting after the spell was gone, and even if I couldn't, Mother would be able to. Smiling, I picked up the other 2 bundles and followed happily after. The end. Guys, it's been really fun reading Talking to Dragons with you and getting to experience one of my favorite books all over again. And I'm going to be thinking about some things for the summer, so be watching my page to see a post or something about that. And if I don't see you over the summer, then I will definitely see you next year on Miss Tucker Reads on Mondays. Have a great rest of the year, and again, if I don't see you, have a good summer. Bye.